He was crouched by the cat's bowl, eating it. My 4-year-old son. Dry pellets, one by one. No plate, no spoon, just tiny fingers trembling as he whispered, "Mommy's skiing." I stared at the cold stove, the empty sink, the glowing tablet showing Rachel's smiling face in designer goggles, posted 47 minutes ago. Not a single bite of real food in sight. Then the doorbell rang. Child services. My wife had reported me. While I cleaned up her mess, she filed the report that could take my son. But I had something she didn't. Receipts, routines, a timeline of truth. And if she wanted war, she'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. My name is Mark Dalton, and I'm 45 years old. Most days find me balancing shifts at the manufacturing plant with coaching my son Jacob's Little League team. The kitchen counter stays organized. Lunch bags, permission slips, and the coffee maker I've had since my marriage to Rachel 16 years ago. Rachel, my wife, used to appreciate our simple rhythm, before designer ski gear and luxury spa weekends became her new normal. Our son Jacob's Little League caps still hang by the door, next to the empty hooks where Rachel's designer coats should be. I keep every receipt, sync every calendar event, and log each missed dinner. Habits from years of coaching that serve a different purpose now. Through the kitchen window, I watch Jacob practicing his pitch, while Rachel's Instagram fills with champagne toasts from places we can't afford. But let me start from the beginning. Through the open kitchen window, the early February chill crept in as I reviewed case notes at my dining room table. The Porter residence felt oddly quiet that Thursday evening. No TV noise, no typical dinner sounds. My clipboard held forms about meal schedules and supervision patterns, but something made me pause my routine assessment. A soft scraping drew my attention toward the kitchen. There, illuminated by the dim light above the stove, I found 4-year-old Jacob crouched by the cat's food bowl. My heart sank as I watched him methodically picking up individual pieces of dry cat food, bringing them to his mouth with small, careful movements. "Jacob, honey," I kept my voice gentle, professional calm masking my concern. "Are you hungry?" He nodded, dark eyes wide. "Mommy's skiing. The pretty mountains." He pointed to his mother's latest Instagram post, displayed on a tablet propped against the fruit bowl. Rachel Porter's beaming face framed by designer sunglasses and pristine snow. I noted the timestamp. 47 minutes ago. The kitchen showed no signs of dinner preparation. The sink held a single sippy cup, long empty. My pen moved steadily across the form. 1942. Child. Found consuming pet food. No evidence of proper meal service. Mark arrived moments later, his work boots still dusty from the plant. The transformation in his face, from exhaustion to shock to contained fury, told its own story, but his actions spoke louder. Without a word to me, he moved with precise efficiency. Milk warmed in a pan, eggs whisked with a steady hand, bread in the toaster. His movements had the practiced grace of someone used to stepping in, filling gaps. While the eggs cooked, he checked his phone. I observed his expression tighten at what must have been bank alerts. My notes captured his methodical response, opening a budgeting app, documenting irregularities, screenshotting evidence. When an unusual withdrawal notification flashed, he created a new folder labeled House and began building what I recognized as a documented timeline. His text to Rachel was brief but firm. Her response, a single heart emoji, arrived as Jacob finished his proper dinner. Mark wiped his son's face with a warm cloth, his gentle touch at odds with the tension in his jaw. The refrigerator's steady hum filled the silence as he scheduled a pediatrician appointment, then set up daily breakfast reminders. Through it all, Mark maintained remarkable composure. My professional assessment noted, "Father demonstrates immediate, appropriate response to nutritional neglect. Shows capacity for routine establishment and crisis management." When a second banking alert lit up his phone, I watched him take one measured breath. His whispered words weren't meant for my ears, but they made it into my notes anyway. Not my son, not our home, not without a fight. As a veteran family services investigator, I've witnessed countless domestic crises, but Mark Dalton's controlled response that evening, prioritizing his child's immediate needs while quietly gathering evidence, stood out. My report would reflect not just the concerning incident, but the father's capability to protect and provide. The case file grew thicker over the following weeks. But that evening remained pivotal. The moment a father discovered his child's vulnerability and chose strategic action over emotional reaction. Each detail I documented would later prove crucial. The timestamps, the bank alerts, the careful way Mark photographed the cat food bowl before cleaning up. Sometimes the strongest advocacy speaks through simple, methodical documentation. I closed my preliminary report with a note about stability. Primary caregiver demonstrates consistent attention to child's basic needs and emotional security. Immediate intervention patterns suggest long-term protective capability. The official language couldn't quite capture the quiet dignity I witnessed. A father transforming betrayal into purposeful action. One careful step at a time. I heard the suitcase wheels before I saw Rachel. That distinctive click-clack across our tile entryway that had become the soundtrack of her returns. Standing in the kitchen doorway, bank statements fanned out on the counter behind me. I waited. The house felt different now. Tighter somehow. Like the walls were holding their breath. "Welcome home," I said, keeping my voice neutral. The dining room light caught the designer logo on her new ski jacket. Another purchase I hadn't known about. She barely glanced my way, busy checking her phone. "Mark, not now. I need a shower and some me time. Actually, we should talk about these self-care weekends." I gestured to the papers on the counter. The numbers aren't adding up. That got her attention. And a laugh that made my teeth clench. "God, you're so boring. Always with your little budgets and spreadsheets." She waved her hand dismissively. "This controlling thing? Not attractive." I stayed steady, the way I do when coaching Little League through a tough inning. "There's an account I found. Links to an email alias, Rachel Porter VI Pagmail." The silence stretched as I watched her face shift. "Women need space, Mark. Private things." She tossed her hair back, all practiced confidence. "You wouldn't understand." Down the hall, Jacob's nightlight cast soft shadows. I thought of him sleeping there, innocent to all this, and opened my laptop. Each word she spoke went straight into the house folder, time-stamped and quoted exactly. "Private spending? Not your business? Need freedom? We could try counseling," I offered. "Work out a budget together, maybe shared calendars." "Seriously?" She cut me off with another laugh, sharper this time. "I don't need penny pinching or permission slips. I need actual living." Her designer weekend bag swung from her shoulder as she headed for the guest bathroom. "You're suffocating me with all this mediocrity." That word hung in the air like smoke. I watched her disappear down the hall, then moved quickly. The bank statements and my notes went into the fireproof lockbox, the one I'd bought after finding those first suspicious withdrawals. Setting alarms on my phone for tomorrow. Lawyer's office. Bank. Jacob's pediatrician. You know that moment when you realize you're not just dealing with carelessness anymore? When you see the strategy behind the chaos? I stood there in my quiet kitchen, phone still buzzing, and felt the ground shift under my feet. This wasn't just about luxury weekends or separate accounts anymore. The game had changed, and I needed to change with it. I checked the locks twice that night. Front door, back door, windows. Old habit from my security guard days. But it felt different now. What I needed to protect wasn't just inside these walls anymore. It was the walls themselves, the roof over my son's head, the whole foundation we'd built our lives on. That notification kept blinking at me. Pending verification required, like a warning light on a dashboard, telling me something big was about to break. I stood in the kitchen's midnight quiet, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The same one that had witnessed Jacob eating cat food just days ago. The same one now watching me realize that my wife wasn't just leaving us behind. She was systematically dismantling everything we'd built. The blue light from my phone cast shadows across the counter where Rachel's words still echoed. Mediocrity, suffocating, boring. Each one a carefully placed brick in whatever wall she was building between us and her new life. I started a new document in the house folder, titled it DCS Contact Log, and began typing with the same steady hands that had made Jacob's eggs earlier that week. The doorbell chimed at 8:15 the next morning, right as Jacob was spooning up the last of his oatmeal. I'd already been up since 5, cleaning and organizing, after a sleepless night. Through the peephole, I saw 2 women in business casual, holding clipboards. My stomach dropped, but my hands stayed steady as I opened the door. "Mr. Dalton, I'm Denise Porter with Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague Sandra Walsh." They held up their badges. "We received a report concerning your son Jacob. May we come in?" "Of course." I stepped aside, gesturing to the kitchen where Jacob sat at the table. "We're just finishing breakfast. Would you like some coffee?" Ms. Porter's eyes swept the room, taking in Jacob's Pokémon placemat, his vitamin cup, the morning routine chart magnetized to the fridge. "No thank you. We need to discuss some concerns about Jacob's care." "I understand." I pulled out my phone, opening my parenting log app. I keep pretty detailed records. Jacob had his 4-year checkup last week with Dr. Martinez. I can give you his office number. And here's our meal planning calendar. Rachel's voice cut through from the hallway. Oh my God. What's going on? She appeared in her silk robe, all wide eyes and theatrical concern. Is everything okay? Ms. Porter turned toward her. Mrs. Dalton? We're following up on a report about possible neglect. Neglect? Rachel gasped, then gestured dramatically at the sink. Well, just look at those dishes piled up. I've been telling Mark he needs to keep up with things better when I'm away. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice even. The dishes are from breakfast. As for Rachel being away, she was at a ski resort this weekend while Jacob was here with me. I have all the dates documented. He's absolutely obsessive about his little lists and schedules. Rachel interrupted, her voice dripping with concern. It's not healthy. Ms. Walsh was making notes while Ms. Porter opened the refrigerator, methodically cataloging its contents. I could see her pen hovering over specific items: fresh fruit, milk dated within the week, prepared lunch containers. And last night, Rachel added, her voice dropping to a stage whisper, I'm pretty sure he left Jacob unattended while he was outside doing something in the garage. That's not accurate, I said calmly, pulling up my phone's timeline. Jacob was in bed by 7:30. I was in the kitchen until 10:45 doing paperwork. The security system log shows no garage door activity. I handed Ms. Porter my phone, watching her eyebrow lift slightly as she scrolled through the time-stamped entries. Mr. Dalton, do you have any additional documentation you'd like to share? Ms. Porter asked, her pen poised. Yes, ma'am. I retrieved my folder from the counter. Here are Jacob's medical records, school reports, and our family calendar. I also have photos of every meal this week, if you'd like to see them. Ms. Porter accepted the papers, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. We'll still need to open a report and may schedule a follow-up visit. You understand this is standard procedure? Of course. Whatever you need. I walked them to the door, keeping my voice professional. Thank you for being thorough. Jacob's safety is my priority. As I closed the door, Rachel's whisper carried across the kitchen. Boring men lose custody, Mark. The words hit like ice water. I stood there, hands still on the doorknob, feeling the ground shift under my feet. The morning sun through the window caught the dust motes dancing above Jacob's half-empty oatmeal bowl, and I knew right then that patience wasn't going to win this fight. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Gary. Need to talk after. Swing shift. Important. My thumb hovered over the word urgent before adding it. Rachel's heels clicked on the tile as she headed for the shower, humming something that sounded like victory. Meet me at Dottie's after shift, Gary had texted back. The one off Route 9 where the coffee tastes like they filtered it through an old boot. I pulled into the parking lot at 11:45 p.m., gravel crunching under my tires. Through the streaked windows, I could see Gary already settled into his usual booth, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug. 16 years at the plant had etched permanent grease lines in his knuckles, like rings in an old tree telling stories of time. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door. The night waitress, her name tag read Bev, barely glanced up from her crossword puzzle. Coffee, she called out. Please. I slid into the booth across from Gary. Thanks for meeting me this late. Gary's eyes were sharp despite the hour. He'd been through his own divorce war 5 years back, and I'd watched it strip him down to grit and bones before he rebuilt himself. Start from the beginning, he said. And don't skip details. I pulled out my folder and laid everything out. Bank statements showing Rachel's mysterious withdrawals, timestamps of her absences, notes from the child services visit. My hands shook slightly as I spread the papers across the worn formica. She's spending money we don't have, Gary. Luxury ski weekends, spa treatments, designer everything. And now she's trying to paint me as neglectful, because I keep track of things. The coffee Bev set down tasted exactly like burnt toast, but I gulped it anyway. Child services showed up at my door yesterday morning. Gary studied each document methodically, his expression hardening. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that had seen this story before. Listen close, Mark. Proof wins cases, not feelings. Every receipt, every text, every photo, it all matters. You need a paper trail that even a blind judge can follow. Where do I start? Gary pulled out his laptop. First, we export every transaction from the past year. Then we request itemized invoices from those resorts. They have to keep records. And those social media posts she's so fond of. We archive everything. I was taking notes when my phone buzzed. Email notification. My stomach dropped as I read the subject line. Notice of custody hearing. Norfolk County Family Court. 6 weeks, I muttered, turning my phone so Gary could see. They scheduled the hearing for 6 weeks from now. Gary nodded grimly. That's your timeline then. Get that notice in your folder and mark your calendar. We've got work to do. I pulled out my pocket calendar, the same kind I'd used to track Little League games and doctor's appointments, and circled May 15th with steady hands. For the next hour, we dug through credit card statements, Gary showing me how to decode merchant category codes. See these 4 digits? That's a resort charge. And this one? High-end retail. Build your pattern. Wait. I pointed at my screen. Play that Instagram story again. Gary tapped the video, and there it was. Rachel, rosy-cheeked from skiing or maybe expensive wine. Her hand clasped with a stranger's as they stood in front of a glowing chalet. The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m. last Saturday, when she'd told me she was at a women's wellness retreat. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Acid churned in my stomach as Gary quickly captured the frame and its metadata. That's the kind of proof that speaks volumes, he said, quietly, saving the file. Time and place, clear as day. I closed the laptop, suddenly unable to look at more. Bev appeared with our check, the paper floating down between cold coffee cups and scattered notes. Anything else you boys need? She asked. I looked at the growing stack of evidence, at Gary's battle-worn expression, at the court notice peeking from my folder. Time, I said. We need time. The week after that diner meeting felt like one long blur of numbers and images. I'd taken 2 personal days from the plant, telling my supervisor I had family matters to handle. Wasn't that the truth? Gary came over after his shift each evening, bringing takeout and that battle-hardened focus I needed. We spread everything across my kitchen table. The same one where Rachel and I used to plan vacation budgets together, back when trust meant something. Here's another one, Gary said, pointing at his screen. The Grand Summit Lodge at Stratton Mountain. 3 nights, premium suite. He rattled off the total. $2,700, Mark. Just for the room. My jaw clenched. That was more than 2 months of Jacob's preschool tuition. Date? Valentine's Day weekend. Gary's voice was carefully neutral. Want to guess what her Facebook post said that day? Self-care retreat? The words tasted bitter. Bingo. Gary logged it into our spreadsheet. Row after row filled with matching dates. Resort charges besides social media lies. I had my own laptop open to Rachel's Instagram feed. The timestamps were damning. Elegant dinners, spa treatments, designer shopping bags posed just so. Each swipe brought another gut punch, but I kept going. This wasn't about feelings anymore. Look at this one. I turned my screen. Rachel lounging by a stone fireplace, champagne in hand. The geotag read, Alpine Haven Resort, matching a $900 charge from last month. Screenshot it, Gary advised. Get the metadata too. We worked like that for hours each night, building what Gary called our truth grid. Every charge found its mirror in Rachel's carefully curated posts. The evidence folder on my desktop grew fatter by the hour. Then we hit pay dirt. Mark. Gary's voice had an edge. Bottom right corner of this photo. I leaned in. Rachel's ski buddy, the same man from the chalet video, had his resort keycard visible. The room number ribbon was clear as day. 2187. Got another one, I said, pulling up a different post. Same guy, different weekend, same room number. Gary's smile was grim. That's not coincidence. Log it. I created a chain of custody document, noting every detail. Dates, times, file names, how we obtained each piece. 16 years of keeping. Maintenance logs at the plant had taught me the value of clean records. The pain was still there, a constant throb behind my ribs, but it was changing, hardening into something useful. Each new piece of evidence felt like laying another brick in a wall between my son and chaos. I called a family attorney the next morning. She walked me through proper document formatting, how to organize everything for maximum impact in court. That evening, I assembled a thick binder. The tabs told their own story. Travel, wardrobe, third party. Under each one, a pattern emerged of Rachel's double life, paid for with our family's future. Around midnight, I took a break to prep for tomorrow. Jacob's oatmeal measured into his favorite bowl, fruit washed and cut, lunch packed with the crusts trimmed just how he likes. These quiet routines kept me anchored when everything else felt adrift. Back at my desk, a new email notification popped up. The subject line made my hand freeze on the mouse. Porter and Associates. Rachel, Dalton, representation. The preview text glowed in my inbox like a warning light. I sat there, cursor hovering, feeling the ground shift beneath my chair. I clicked the email open, and man, you could practically smell the leather office chairs through the screen. The kind of message that probably cost Rachel $300 just to have drafted. Our firm has serious concerns regarding Mr. Dalton's apparent bitterness and documented instability following the separation. The words crawled across my screen like expensive insects. Pattern of obsessive record-keeping suggests concerning behavior. They'd attach screenshots. My text messages asking about Jacob's dinner. My calendar invites for family counseling. My saved receipts. All twisted to paint me as some kind of unstable stalker. Funny how keeping good records becomes obsessive when it doesn't fit their story. You ever notice how lawyers can make anything sound sinister? Even my Little League coaching got spun. Concerning level of involvement in child's activities suggests compensation for domestic inadequacies. I saved the whole thing to a new folder labeled Opposition and took a deep breath. The kitchen clock ticked steady behind me, the same clock that had counted out 16 years of normal mornings. Time to be strategic, not angry. Dear Ms. Porter, I typed, keeping it simple. Thank you for reaching out. I'm happy to confirm Jacob's current routines. I listed everything. Pediatric checkups, all attended. Daycare pickup times, always prompt. Little League practice schedule, third season coaching. Added contact info for Jacob's doctor, teachers, and fellow coaches. All facts, no feelings. My phone buzzed. Rachel posting on Instagram again. There she was, staged at our old dining table with takeout arranged to look homemade. Family dinner night, read the caption. The timestamp said 10 minutes ago. But Jacob and I had eaten mac and cheese together 3 hours earlier. I saved the post anyway. More evidence of the image game she was playing. You seeing this? I texted Gary, forwarding Rachel's post. His reply came quick. Classic moves. She's building her court story. Stay boring on paper, deadly in court. He was right. I pulled out the evidence binder and started revising. Less about betrayal, more about timestamps. Less emotion, more third-party verification. Bank seals, resort confirmations, social media metadata, the kind of proof that speaks for itself. I created a fresh document. Custody timeline. Started with that night I found Jacob eating cat food. Added every relevant date since. Each entry got its supporting documents listed. Bank statements, messages, photos. Clean, clinical, crushing in its simplicity. When I finished, I heard Jacob calling from his room. Bad dream, probably. They'd been more frequent lately. I found him tangled in his Superman sheets, eyes bright with sleep fear. Hey, buddy, I said, smoothing his hair. Remember what Superman says about being brave? He nodded against his pillow. It's okay to be scared sometimes. That's right. I tucked the blanket around him tighter. Even Superman needs rest. Back at my desk, the clock showed midnight. My inbox pinged with another message from Porter and Associates. But now I was ready. Let them spin their stories. I had something better. The truth. Stamped and dated. I noticed a sticky note Gary had left earlier. Document everything. React to nothing. Below it, he'd drawn a simple equals sign, followed by win. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as new emails stacked up, each one probably costing Rachel another chunk of our savings. The kitchen hummed with midnight quiet. And somewhere in that piece, I found my center. Rachel wanted to play image warfare? Fine, but images fade. Facts are forever. And I had 16 years of facts. All organized in bankers' boxes and backup drives, waiting to tell their story. I'd checked property records 100 times during custody cases, but this one made my coffee go cold. Something wasn't right about the mortgage addendum that popped up on my screen. You develop instincts in this job. Like a carpenter who can feel when wood's not true just by running their hand over it. This document felt wrong before I even started reading. There it was. A loan modification, dated 3 months back, during what Rachel had labeled a wellness retreat on her Instagram. The amount made my stomach clench, nearly half the house's value, with interest rates that'd make a payday lender blush. But it was the signature that stopped my breath. Mark Dalton scrawled at the bottom. Except, I pulled up his driver's license scan from our files, held them side by side on my monitor. The difference was subtle. You'd miss it if you weren't looking, but I was looking. The real Mark's signature had a distinctive hook on the K, a habit formed over decades. This one smudged there instead, like someone hesitating over unfamiliar territory. The N at the end was too rounded, missing that sharp angle I'd seen on every document he'd filed with us. My hands shook slightly as I dialed the bank's fraud department. 20 minutes on hold, smooth jazz making my headache worse. Finally, a voice. This is Kevin in Fraud Prevention. I need verification on notarization records for a loan modification. I gave him the reference number, kept my tone professional despite my racing pulse. Specifically, the in-person signing logs from March 15th. One moment. Keys clicking. I'm showing that was processed through our downtown branch. Let me pull the notary records. Huh, what is it? The notary stamp is valid, but more clicking. The notary listed was out sick that entire week. We have her medical leave paperwork. I felt the floor shift under my chair. I'll need that documented. I'll flag this for review. You should have an official response within... No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't flag it yet. Just send me the notary's leave records. I could practically hear him frowning. Ma'am, if there's suspected fraud, I know the protocols, but this is part of a larger case. Flagging it now could compromise. I chose my words carefully. Other ongoing investigations. That magic phrase worked. He promised to email the records without triggering automated alerts. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the forgery on my screen. The implications stacked up like dominoes. Rachel had forged Mark's signature, taken out a predatory loan against their house, and done it all while posting spa selfies from her self-care weekend. If this came out now, she'd have weeks to move money, create cover stories, maybe even force a foreclosure to muddy the custody waters. I thought of Mark's face when he'd first walked into my office. Steady, determined, but with that raw hurt he couldn't quite hide. He'd trusted me to help prove he was stable, reliable, the kind of father a judge would believe in. I created a new folder, Hold for Court. The forged document went in first, followed by the notary records. I encrypted everything, saved backups to a USB drive, and locked both the physical and digital copies away. On a yellow sticky note, I wrote one word: patience. Stuck it to my laptop where I'd see it first thing tomorrow. Some evidence is like a loaded gun. You have to know exactly when to use it. Through my office window, I could see the park where Mark took Jacob every Saturday, rain or shine. A simple routine that meant everything to a 4-year-old boy. Rachel had risked that stability for what? Ski trips and status posts? My desk phone buzzed. Another message from Rachel's lawyer. Probably more polished threats about Mark's concerning behavior. Let them play their games. Sometimes the best move is to hold your cards close and wait for the right moment. I closed my laptop, double-checked the safe's lock, and gathered my things. The forged loan would have its day in court, but not 1 minute sooner. 6 weeks can feel like forever when you're building a case, but I've learned timing matters more than speed. At my desk, yellow legal pad in front of me, I mapped out how the hearing would flow. You have to think like a storyteller sometimes. Build the tension, lay the groundwork, then deliver the punch that changes everything. First section, Mark's routines with Jacob. I jotted down the sequence: breakfast logs, daycare pickup times, doctor visits. The kind of boring, reliable details that make judges nod. Every parent claims they're stable. Mark had the paperwork to prove it. Below that, I sketched out the spending matrix Gary and I had built. Rachel's luxury purchases lined up neat and damning against her self-care alibis. Each resort charge matched to time-stamped photos, each designer purchase tracked to social media posts. The kind of evidence that makes lawyers squirm. But the loan documentation, that went last. Like the ace you keep in your sleeve until the perfect moment. I circled that section twice, wrote "hold" in the margin. You've got your ducks lined up? Gary's voice came from my doorway. He'd stopped by on his lunch break, carrying coffee that smelled better than our office sludge. Getting there. I showed him the timeline. Bank's fraud investigator confirmed they can authenticate the notary records at the hearing. Proves she was out sick when Rachel supposedly had the loan witnessed. Gary nodded slowly. Clean kill shot. I pulled out a manila envelope, marked it Exhibit L in careful block letters. The forged loan papers went inside, along with the notary's medical leave documentation. I sealed it deliberately, like loading ammunition. Mark's ready? Gary asked. As he'll ever be. I checked my watch. He's got Jacob at daycare now. Everything's running like clockwork. Meals, schedules, transport. No disruptions for the boy. That was crucial. Courts notice when parents maintain stability during stress. Mark had kept Jacob's world steady while Rachel played ski bunny with borrowed money. I crossed the office to my planning calendar, checking off witness confirmations. The daycare director would testify about pickup times. Jacob's pediatrician would verify regular checkups. Even Mark's Little League co-coach had agreed to speak about his dedication to the team. Bank authentication letters came in. I tapped a thick folder, all ready for exhibits. The sun was setting outside my window as I finished the preparations. Time for one last review of Jacob's care arrangements. I'd helped Mark set up a detailed schedule. Breakfast menu planned, daycare contacts updated, backup drivers listed for emergencies. A father shouldn't lose custody just because he works honest hours at a plant. Later that evening, I watched through my kitchen window as Mark's house lit up across the street. The smell of pasta sauce drifted out. Dinner right on schedule. Through the living room window, I could see him reading to Jacob in the big armchair. Just another normal night, exactly as it should be. Back at my desk, that yellow pad sat waiting. The word patience stood out, underlined twice. 6 weeks of building this case, and tomorrow it would all unfold exactly as planned. I packed my briefcase methodically. Binder with indexed exhibits, USB backup of all files, sealed envelopes organized by sequence. Each piece had its purpose, its perfect moment. In my hallway mirror, I adjusted a charcoal tie against a freshly pressed white shirt. Court appearance matters. You want to look as reliable as your evidence. My phone buzzed. A final confirmation from the bank investigator. Documentation ready for authentication per request. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., early enough to review everything one last time before the hearing. Through my window, the street was quiet now. In Mark's house, a single light still glowed, probably double-checking Jacob's lunch for tomorrow, keeping those routines solid. Some cases are won with dramatic revelations, but the best victories? They're built on patient preparation, perfect timing, and the simple power of documented truth. The courthouse doors swung heavy, like the weight of that evidence binder in my hands. I'd spent hours organizing every document, making sure each piece told its story clearly. Mark walked in beside Gary, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The morning light filtering through tall windows cast long shadows across the polished tile. You could smell the mix of furniture polish and anxiety that fills every courtroom. Those familiar scents took me back to my first custody case 15 years ago. Same wooden benches, same tension in the air. I spotted my colleagues from child services already seated, notepads ready. We exchanged professional nods. My case notes on Mark sat thick in their files. Detailed observations of consistent mealtimes, structured routines, and a father's quiet dedication. Rachel swept in like she was entering a charity gala instead of a custody hearing. Designer suit, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. Her lawyer matched her polish. Italian shoes, manicured nails tapping on a leather portfolio. They settled across the aisle, radiating the kind of confidence money buys. The judge entered, and we all rose. As we took our seats again, I watched Mark's face carefully. He kept his expression neutral, hands steady on the table. Good. Emotional displays rarely help in these moments. Rachel's attorney opened with a flourish, projecting what looked like a family photo album onto the courtroom screen. "Your Honor," she began, voice smooth as expensive whiskey, "we're here because Mr. Dalton has become emotionally distant, creating an unstable environment for young Jacob." I felt Mark's slight tension beside me, but noted how he maintained his composure. The presentation continued, each slide carefully chosen to paint Mark's reliability as rigidity, his consistency as coldness. Here we see an empty dining room. The lawyer gestured to a pristine table setting. Mr. Dalton's obsession with schedules has turned mealtimes into military operations, devoid of warmth or spontaneity. The judge leaned forward, asking practical questions about Jacob's daily routines. "What time is dinner typically served?" 6:30, Your Honor," Mark answered clearly. "Jacob needs structure for his bedtime routine. And morning schedules? Breakfast at 7. I pack his lunch while he eats, then we leave for daycare at 7:45. Rachel's lawyer interrupted with another slide. "Your Honor, these rigid timetables demonstrate Mr. Dalton's inability to adapt or provide emotional nurturing." The judge's pen moved steadily across her notepad. "Ms. Porter," she turned to me, "your observations of the household routines?" "I conducted multiple home visits over 6 weeks," I replied. Mr. Dalton maintained consistent mealtimes, age-appropriate activities, and regular medical checkups. The environment was stable and nurturing. Rachel's attorney produced more photos. Spotless dishes in the sink, labeled containers in the fridge. Evidence of compulsive behavior, she argued. But I noticed the judge's slight frown. Mark sat straight-backed through it all, eyes forward, voice steady when answering questions. Not once did he glance at Rachel, even as she whispered and smirked with her lawyer. The judge's questions continued, methodical. Who handles school communications? Medical appointments? Extracurricular activities? Each time, Mark provided specific dates, names, and documentation. I watched the judge noting his precise responses, comparing them to the theatrical presentation opposite. Rachel's lawyer played her next slide with a flourish. A collection of social media posts showing Rachel at parent meetings and school events. While Mr. Dalton was absent, consumed by his rigid schedules, but I saw the judge's patience wearing thin with the polished performance. Her questions grew more pointed, focused on concrete details rather than carefully staged photos. Mark waited, poised, and prepared. I knew what evidence sat in that binder. Stark facts ready to cut through the glossy facade. The kind of documented truth that no amount of expensive legal theatrics could dismiss. The morning sun had climbed higher, throwing courthouse shadows in new directions. Rachel's confidence still gleamed, but something shifted in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. I watched Mark request permission to present his evidence, his voice steady as machinery. Your Honor, I've prepared a detailed timeline of Jacob's care routines, with third-party verification. The judge nodded, and Mark began methodically laying out documents. My own notes would corroborate much of what he presented. I'd witnessed those consistent morning routines myself. 7 a.m. breakfasts, oatmeal with fruit, milk in the blue cup Jacob loved. Everything documented. Everything verified. These are the pediatric visit records, Mark continued, sliding forward a stack of receipts. You'll note each appointment was kept on schedule, with follow-up care tracked here. His finger traced the dates, matching perfectly with my observation logs. The daycare logs came next. Sign-in sheets, parent-teacher communications, all methodically organized. I remembered watching him drop Jacob off during my morning visits, how he'd always take time to help his son hang up his backpack and give him a proper goodbye. Rachel shifted in her seat as Mark moved to financial exhibits. Her lawyer's pen tapped faster against the legal pad. This matrix, Mark explained, laying out a detailed spreadsheet, correlates credit card charges with social media timestamps. He pointed to highlighted rows. Here's a charge at the Grand Summit Resort on February 12th. The corresponding Instagram post shows the same location, same date. The judge studied the document carefully. Continue. Mark's presentation remained factual, emotionless. Boutique charges at Aspen Village, February 13th. He placed a photo beside the receipt. This public post shows the purchased items being worn at dinner that evening. I noticed Rachel's perfectly manicured nails digging into her armrest as Mark produced more photos. These images are from public social media accounts, he stated. The metadata confirms locations and dates. The pictures told their story without commentary needed. Rachel with a male companion at various ski resorts. Their body language intimate and unguarded. Mark referenced each image's timestamp against hotel charges, restaurant bills, lift tickets. The precision of his documentation was impressive. Exactly what courts need to cut through emotional claims. Rachel's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, this amounts to surveillance. Mr. Dalton's obsessive tracking demonstrates exactly the controlling behavior we've described. These are all public posts and verified transactions, Mark responded calmly. No private investigation was required. The evidence speaks for itself. I watched the judge's expression carefully as she examined the financial records. Her eyes narrowed at certain entries, and she made several notes before looking up. Are there any additional financial disclosures relevant to this case? She asked, her tone carrying that particular weight judges use when they sense there's more to the story. Mark exchanged a quick glance with Gary, who sat stoically in the gallery. His hand moved to a sealed envelope on the table, marked simply, Exhibit L. Yes, Your Honor, he replied. I'd like to reserve one final document for rebuttal, if permitted. The judge studied him for a moment, then nodded. So noted. Rachel's confident posture had faltered slightly, but her lawyer quickly redirected attention to their carefully curated presentation of family photos. I knew those images well. They'd been part of their response to my initial investigation, but seeing them alongside Mark's documented timeline, they felt staged, performative. Throughout it all, Mark maintained that steady calm I'd observed during my home visits. The same patience he showed while helping Jacob with breakfast or reviewing homework was evident in how he presented each piece of evidence. Methodical, thorough, focused on facts rather than emotions. The morning light streaming through the high courthouse windows had shifted, casting different shadows across the evidence spread before us. Rachel's designer suit still gleamed, but her earlier confidence seemed to dim with each documented transaction Mark presented. I glanced at my own case notes, thinking of all the morning visits, the consistent routines I'd witnessed. The reality I'd observed aligned perfectly with the evidence Mark had just presented. A father's quiet dedication, proved through actions rather than carefully filtered photos. As a child services investigator for 15 years, I'd seen my share of custody battles. Most were messy tangles of he said, she said. But Mark Dalton's case stood apart from the first home visit. His meticulous documentation had matched every observation in my reports. And now I watched that same attention to detail unfold in court. "Your Honor," Mark said, his voice steady as he rose. "For rebuttal, I request judicial notice of a recorded loan instrument." He lifted the envelope marked Exhibit L with work-worn hands that didn't shake. Rachel's perfect posture stiffened slightly. I'd seen that micro-reaction before in cases where carefully constructed narratives began to crack. Mark produced 3 documents, laying them side by side. The first is a bank letter confirming a high-interest second mortgage taken out against our home. The second is the notary log from the date of execution. The third is my driver's license for signature comparison. The judge leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. I noted how Mark maintained that same calm demeanor I'd observed during my surprise morning inspections. The steadiness of a man who knows his truth will hold up under scrutiny. "The loan was executed," Mark continued, "during what was described as a self-care weekend at Summit Ridge Resort." He placed a transaction record next to the loan date. "You'll note the timing overlap. The bank's authentication letter came next. Their fraud department identified several irregularities with the signature purporting to be mine." Mark pointed to specific portions of the analysis. "The pressure points and stroke patterns don't match my verified signatures on file." I watched Rachel's lawyer shift uncomfortably as Mark displayed the payment schedule. The numbers were stark. Monthly payments that would strain any middle-class budget, with a balloon payment that could trigger foreclosure. "And finally," Mark said, sliding forward a printed text log, "these messages were sent from Mrs. Dalton's phone at the ski lodge during the exact hour the notary log claims I was present for signing." The timestamp evidence hit like a gavel itself. Rachel's lawyer shot to his feet, his polished manner cracking. "Your Honor, there could be clerical errors in the timing." "Mrs. Dalton," the judge cut in, her tone carrying that weight of authority I'd heard countless times. "Can you explain the signature discrepancy under oath?" The courtroom fell silent. Rachel's designer suit suddenly seemed too tight at the shoulders. Her carefully crafted image of a wronged wife seeking freedom crumbled against hard evidence of financial deception. I glanced at my case notes. All those morning visits where I'd found Mark preparing balanced breakfasts, checking homework, maintaining the stable home environment that my reports had verified. The contrast between documented reality and Rachel's curated narrative had never been sharper. Mark remained perfectly still, hands folded on the table. He didn't look at Rachel, didn't press his advantage with accusation. He simply let the evidence speak, while the judge studied the loan documents with growing concern. The silence stretched until the judge set down her pen. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." The gavel crack echoed against the wood paneling. I'd testified in enough cases to recognize a turning point. As bailiffs directed everyone to clear the courtroom, I noticed how Mark's shoulders stayed square, his movements precise as he organized his exhibits. Rachel's path to the door seemed less certain, her heels no longer clicking with quite the same confidence on the courthouse tile. Gary squeezed Mark's shoulder as he passed, the kind of quiet support I'd noted in my reports about Mark's support system. Throughout my investigation, I documented a network of reliable friends and family who helped maintain Jacob's stable routine. The morning sun had shifted to illuminate the evidence spread. Across the table, bank records, notary logs, and text messages that told a story no amount of polished legal maneuvering could obscure. In my years of observation, the truth usually emerged not in grand revelations, but in carefully assembled details exactly like these. When we filed back into the courtroom after recess, you could feel the shift in the air. The polished veneer had cracked, leaving something raw and brittle in its place. I'd seen this moment before, in cases where carefully constructed facades finally gave way to documented truth. From my seat near the gallery rail, I watched Mark settle at the plaintiff's table, with that same steady presence I'd noted during my sunrise inspections. Rachel's entrance was markedly different now. Her designer heels didn't quite strike the floor with their earlier confidence. The judge cleared her throat, shuffling the evidence photos I'd provided alongside Mark's timeline. Having reviewed the submitted documentation, including child services reports, she nodded in my direction, acknowledging the thick file of morning visit logs I'd compiled. "This court finds compelling evidence of consistent routines, nutritious meals, and stable home environment maintained by Mr. Dalton." I glanced at my notes. All those pre-dawn checks where I'd found Mark already up, packing balanced lunches, reviewing homework, maintaining the quiet reliability that my reports had verified. The contrast between documented reality and Rachel's curated social media narrative had never been starker. Furthermore, the judge continued, the apparent financial impropriety regarding the second mortgage requires immediate attention. Primary physical custody is hereby awarded to Mark Dalton, with supervised visitation rights reserved for Rachel. Dalton pending further review. The gavel crack echoed against wood paneling. Rachel's lawyer immediately began whispering about appeals, but the weight of evidence, my morning report stacked alongside Mark's meticulous records, had shifted the ground permanently. Within days, official notices began arriving at my office. The bank had frozen Rachel's associated accounts pending a fraud investigation. The same social circle that had once amplified her ski lodge selfies now circulated copies of the court order with thinly veiled disdain. A two-pronged collapse. Legal custody lost, and carefully curated standing shattered. I made one final home visit that evening, pulling into the driveway just as Mark was helping Jacob out of his car seat. The house lights glowed warm against the dusk. Through the kitchen window, I watched Mark move with practiced ease, warming a plate, checking homework, maintaining the routines I'd documented for weeks. Jacob's laughter drifted through the screen door as I approached. Mark noticed me and waved me in, the same calm welcome he'd shown during every surprise inspection. As Jacob settled at the table with his dinner, Mark reached into a drawer and pulled out what I recognized as the foreclosure notice I'd noted in my initial report. Without ceremony, he tore it into neat strips and dropped them in the trash. A quiet, symbolic act that spoke volumes about fresh starts and restored dignity. Jacob's continued giggles over his meal provided the perfect soundtrack, the natural joy of a child in a stable home. I made my final note standing in the doorway, watching father and son share an ordinary evening meal. Nothing flashy or Instagram-worthy, just the simple proof of reliable love. Mark caught my eye and nodded, his expression peaceful as Jacob launched into a story about his day. In all my years of home observation, I'd learned that true parental worth reveals itself not in carefully staged photos or expensive vacations, but in these quiet moments of consistent care. Mark's words from our first meeting echoed in my mind as I closed my notebook. A man's worth is proven at home. Looking at Jacob's bright face across that dinner table, at Mark's steady presence in his son's life, I couldn't have documented it better myself.